Hello, sir.
Hi. Okay, so let me open up your paper, share the screen, and this is being recorded, so I'll send
Yes.
you the link to the recording if you want to watch it again. And okay, so here's your paper. And all right, so what did I write here? Donald Trump's rise was something that was a growing theme ever since the turn of the century. Uh-huh. And even before, I think. I guess I would say that the rise of Donald Trump reflects the rise of American conservative populist nationalism, right populism, that began in the 1970s with the with the rise of Richard Nixon and the humiliation the United States was experiencing by being unable to win the war in Vietnam. And Richard Nixon exploited that to promise what he called peace with honor. Peace with honor is, you can find the speech on YouTube, his peace with honor speech. He's promising that he will allow the US to leave the Vietnam War without looking like it was beaten. Which, of course, is a change from the initial motivation for the U.S. to get involved in the Vietnam War, which was defense against the perceived Russian version of Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. And then the Americans soon came to learn that this really wasn't what was the cause of this war. It wasn't Soviet expansionism, it was Vietnamese nationalism, and America was on the wrong side. But America had already lost thousands of American soldiers dead, and so we didn't want to accept that we made a mistake. So you try to overcome making a mistake by enforcing your will, and thereby you won. Whatever the reason why the war started, it doesn't really matter, we won. Or at least we didn't lose. And this is not just a history lesson because this is being played out today with Afghanistan. Biden's adversaries are claiming that he allowed US to be humiliated. They don't use those terms, but they say, America's values were sacrificed, American people are still left behind in Afghanistan, it was incompetent, but in some, it's that America looked like it was a buffoon in the way it left Afghanistan, the way people were, dramatic images of those people trying to hold onto the plane that was flying, the American Air Force plane, and falling off.
I saw the images.
Oh yeah, and I mean, of course, I'm an old man, so I remember similar images when the Americans were leaving, not the military, but what the embassy was fleeing out Saigon in 1975. The U.S. soldiers had stopped fighting in Vietnam by 1973, but they still had 18 months between the last American fighting soldiers there and then the fall of South Vietnam. And I think that was an assumption in terms of the prevailing view in the American foreign policy bureaucracy that this regime in Afghanistan, the American client regime in Afghanistan, is not going to be able to maintain itself. There needs to be some kind of negotiated or settlement or just some kind of, there's going to be some kind of break period between the Americans stopping having their soldiers there and maybe, keep the Air Force involved, but we'll have some time. But of course, that didn't work out that way. But when it became clear the Americans were leaving, the whole regime just collapsed overnight. And so this is why this is really kind of significant, because with that, it wasn't just the Vietnam War. It was Nixon came into office claiming that he had a plan, and his plan was connected with, it turned out, opening up relations with China 21 years, less than 18 years after the end of the Korean War, where Americans and Chinese soldiers were killing each other by the thousands. And thereby to use that new political leverage to allow the Americans to disengage from Vietnam without appearing to be defeated by North Vietnam, by basically using the leverage of China against the Soviet Union to pressure North Vietnam to cooperate with the Americans, or else the Americans were going to support the Chinese, because the Chinese and the Soviets were already killing each other over the border areas in Siberia. And so Nixon got reelected. Unlike Trump, he got reelected in 1972 in a landslide against George McGovern, but then he ended up resigning 2 years later because of the criminal behavior of his administration. And then 1 year later, South Vietnam collapsed after Nixon was out. and Gerald Ford was his vice president, and Gerald Ford made many policy decisions. He's, however, tried to get elected as president in 1976, and he lost to Jimmy Carter. How much the humiliation of the collapse of America's allies in Cambodia and Laos and Vietnam had in that, we can always speculate as to why. I mean, typically people say that Ford lost election because he pardoned Nixon. When after Nixon left office, he said Nixon couldn't be prosecuted for anything that he did as an individual, and that's typical. That's the typical response to why people argue Ford lost re-election. Maybe I don't know how you can check to see how much it was the anger over the collapse of America's efforts in Southeast Asia, but now you have this collapse in Afghanistan. And there wasn't 18 months, it was just immediate. And we did see and again, this is important from the perspective of nationalism, because America is a nation state, and this intensely engaged in this kind of nationalistic behavior on a collective level, in terms of the three levels of analysis, the state level, that goes beyond necessarily a conscious awareness of what the decision makers are it's going on in their own heads, as to what's driving, as to how America's behaving. So we will see what happens. But what I do know, to the extent to which public opinion surveys are useful at all, that Joe Biden's public opinion polls approval ratings, according to Harris and Gallup, took a big hit immediately after the Kabul collapse. Like they're saying, the news reports, and that's all I'm relying on, state that for the first time, Biden's public opinion approval ratings dropped below 50%. In the days after the Kabul collapse.
When you're talking about approval ratings, is it then the people who already voted for him, or the entire American
entire American view? Now, public opinion surveys are problematic. As Hans Morgenthau would point out, people are not consistent often, typically, in their thinking and feelings. All public opinion survey ratings show you a way somebody is feeling, or typically feeling, or explaining themselves at a particular point of time. How they will behave in November, in 13 months, when the next congressional midterm elections happen, November of next year, might not be the same, or might not reflect what the trends in public opinion approval ratings 13 months earlier today, in October 2021. But so the question is, given what Hans Morgenthau and the classical realists highlight, that the mass public is by its nature inconsistent in its views and feelings. You, as the president of the United States, if you're the president, are a politician, and you are supposed to understand this. According to the Gabriel Allman-Lipset thesis, which you'll read about later in the book about public opinion, in the chapter on American public opinion, the typical view, the traditional view, is that basically the majority of Americans don't pay attention to foreign affairs closely. They do pay attention insofar as they want to feel good about their country. So they'll pay attention to those striking images of people falling off the planes flying out of Kabul. But they're not going to read closely the issues, and not going to study them, and not going to get the details. But they do know what it means to look like America lost, right? And they don't like believing that their country lost, that their country was beaten.
I don't feel this is unique to the United States. I think it goes for other nations as well. Yeah. That it's only a small part of the population that's actually interested in what is deeper than what the news reports on, like a very shallow state, like people fall off planes, and that's all you get to see, not the underlying issues.
Yeah. But of course, also those smaller groups that are attentive to foreign affairs, they have their political objectives and aims and interests that they're trying to promote. And they also are focused on the political elections, because they know the politicians are focused on elections. So they're going to try to influence the decision makers in foreign policy, both through advice, but also through indirectly, but very forcefully through appealing to their desire to win re-election. And using their influence over public opinion, to the extent they have influence over public opinion, the general public opinion, broader public opinion, to constrain and push foreign policy decision makers to act in the ways they want them to act. And so those people who want, for example, and all the politicians, all elected politicians know this. So, Biden is not likely to, for example, reduce American commitments to Israel, because he already is vulnerable on being, quote unquote, weak or incompetent in the Afghanistan case, as a charge that his political opponents and adversaries who want to win power and win elections are using against them. And so he's not going to want to appear to confirm that propaganda that his administration is seriously weak or incompetent. And so this makes further cutbacks of American commitments abroad more problematic because of this political internal competition within the United States among these elite factions that are each trying to appeal to American nationalist sentiment to support them. Well, also, of course, also there are other motivations people have besides nationalism. So Trump, Biden is trying to emphasize their economic interests, right? Their utilitarian economic interests in terms of developing more social justice policies in the form of the welfare state policies to develop them further in terms of childcare and care for education and so on, and to put together a coalition that will hopefully not cause them to lose more.
Was Trump able to remove the so-called Obamacare during his term, or
he tried, but it didn't get enough votes in the Senate.
It's still there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's the big discussion that some people are warning that the Biden administration, the Democratic Party is really going to be hit badly in 13 months. The Democrats are going to lose a lot of control. They're going to lose at least one house, maybe both houses of Congress. So if Biden wants to control, so if Biden really wants to do something, it has to be done now. This next few weeks, to have any chance of appealing to those other interests that people have besides nationalism and national sentiment. But it's just this nationalism emerges during times of crises, and it typically overrides. It can override economic interests, and particularly in a nation state like the United States or China or Russia, and so. But I want to make sure that my points are clear here, right? Okay. All right. So yeah. So this is how, as I've talked with the other students as well about their papers, right? That what does it mean to be, if America is overextended, but American presidents are being punished for cutting America's commitments, like the way Afghanistan is being cut by the United States, by the Biden administration. If Biden administration is going to be punished politically for that, what does it mean to be overextended? What does it mean? What does it mean for Trump, who talked about America's wasting all this money in foreign wars, but at the same time, his allies and himself, Trump, who's going to run for president again, is claiming the Biden administration is incompetent or weak or ineffective. So it leads itself to, for example, I mean, killing the second highest official in the Iranian hierarchy of political regime, Qasem Soleimani, the general of the Revolutionary Guards in Iran, right before the pandemic in January of 2020.
Yeah, I heard about this.
Yeah, I mean, but at the same time, I mean, what did Trump do? I mean, okay, Trump's big commitment to reducing American overextension was reaching that agreement with the Taliban, again, right before the pandemic, right? And so is there a commitment, is there a connection between killing Qasem Soleimani in January 3rd or 4th or 2nd of 2020, and then beginning those negotiations with the Taliban that I think by February 2020, the US agreed it was going to leave by May of 2021, and in return for the Taliban no longer attacking American soldiers because the Americans are leaving. And that was what, now, and then the pandemic hits. If the pandemic had not hit, would Trump have gotten reelected? Probably. I can't be certain, but probably.
And why would you say probably? Because
the economy was doing okay, and and most people don't pay close attention to foreign affairs, and it was the pandemic that, on top of everything else, that heightened the anxiety and angers in American society that led to the George Floyd murder and protests. I think it wasn't just the fact that George Floyd was killed. It was on top of all of the other stresses and strains in American society, in addition to Donald Trump's exploitation of polarization. Is during the pandemic, when people are intensely stressed and nervous, concerned, and he's playing more with that by polarizing more. So, he lost. I mean, Joe Biden got 7 million more votes than Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton got almost 4 million more votes than Donald Trump, and she still lost the election because of the electoral college system in the United States, even though she got 3 or 4 million, close to 4 million more votes. I think close to 4 million more votes than Trump did overall. Biden got 7 million, but still, it was close insofar as, for example, he won Georgia by 15,000 votes. He won Pennsylvania by 20,000 votes. He won Arizona by 20,000 votes over Trump. And even though he got big majorities in California and New York State, that doesn't matter because it's 50 different, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 different elections in the United States. Each state has an election for president, basically. And so what would have happened if Trump had been reelected? He reached this agreement with the Taliban back in February 2020. They were supposed to leave by May 2021. If Trump was still in office, would he have taken the American soldiers out by May 2021? I would assume so. But we won't know. Otherwise, because he wasn't there.
He would appear weak, not following through on his promises, and he probably would announce this to the people as well. He's gonna remove all the American soldiers from Afghanistan, get our young men home, young men and women, get them home. It's
but at the same time, I mean, this is, again, we're imagining a world where the pandemic had not happened, right? And that, the economies are doing okay. So he pulls out the American soldiers, the Taliban take power, and then Trump, is basically saying to what would he have said in this hypothetical alternative reality that we're describing now, that he would have said, well, he didn't withdraw from Iraq. He didn't withdraw from Syria when those Iranian allied Shiite Iranian allied militias were somehow involved in shelling American military base, and he killed that. He killed that ordered the killing of Qasem Soleimani. So now. Would he have had the authority to pull the United States out of Afghanistan without having to worry about re-election? Okay, because I don't think he would have stayed in office. He couldn't try to stay. We all know that the person can only be elected twice to be president of the United States.
Yes.
So, but of course, what we know. What happened. There was the pandemic, there was the George Floyd protests, there was the stress and strain and the perceived incompetence in dealing with the COVID-19, and the economy, takes a hit, and tries to carry out a coup. He loses. He's not able to carry out a coup. He's removed, and then Biden comes in, and then Biden is now thinking about the next elections, and Trump is still dominating the Republican Party. So I guess, but the point is that the rise of Trump in 2016 is a reflection of American envy and anger towards the consequences of the Cold War system that the Americans set up as part of containment of the supposed Russian version of Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union. Including an economic system, including global institutional system of finance, of trade, of appealing to global public opinion during the Cold War, because the Soviet Union is always claiming during after World War II that look at this American system, look how they treat their black people, look how they're racist they are, look how they don't let people who are not white come into America. Right? Look how they adopted laws in the 1920s to restrict immigration. So only people from Germany and Northern Europe could get into the United States. People coming from elsewhere had a difficult time. And this is clearly capitalism and racism go together. So adopt the Soviet system, adopt communism, because communism is really standing for real human rights. And so the United States adopts these policies to appeal to the rest of the world that we're good, we're nice. Capitalism is great, democracy is great, including the civil rights legislation of the 1960s, but also increasing immigration, right? The United States changes immigration laws in the 1960s under Johnson, the same president got us in Vietnam and who also oversaw the civil rights legislation, changed American immigration laws to allow people from Africa and Asia more easily to come to the United States legally. And it was at that point you started to see more like Asian American population really grow in size. And this, for this effort to appeal to world public opinion is really powerful as a concern, as the Americans are trying to use soft power appeals in a world where the Soviet Union is also trying to use soft power appeals. Because you have to compete indirectly in the nuclear era. You can't just fight it out on the battlefield because, it's suicide. But for many Americans, they were celebratory about the Soviet Union being defeated. But there was always this, even though they had been convinced the Soviet Union was a big threat, generally speaking, their willingness to continue to fight wars without the Soviet Union was demonstrated, the limit in terms of, for example, George H.W. Bush. So George H.W. Bush is the vice president of Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan, exploited this rise of American nationalism, beginning with Nixon, and the anger and disillusionment about America's frustrations and failures supposedly under Jimmy Carter in the 1970s. And then Gorbachev comes to power in 1985, and the United States claims credit for having forced the Soviet Union to reform and eventually disappear. And Ronald Reagan and the Republican Party in particular. And then Yugoslavia disintegrates into violence and is disintegrating. And then Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait in 1990, even before the Soviet Union's gone. And George H.W. Bush says, we got to stop him. We got to fight this war. This guy's a little Hitler. And they bomb the hell out of Iraq. They do a ground offensive, lasts 4 days to drive them out of Kuwait. They lose less than 100 soldiers. God knows how many tens of thousands of Iraqis were killed. And George Bush, H.W. Bush is so popular, over 90% public opinion approval ratings. Woo-hoo! New world order, he declares. New world order. We're going to build a new world order after the Cold War. And but then the economy becomes weak. And Bill Clinton emerges. And Bill Clinton emphasizes in his campaign the economy. And George Bush loses election to Bill Clinton 4 years after he won in 1988. So clearly the Americans were not so excited about this New World Order stuff that George H.W. Bush was excited about. but there was some talk about reducing the size of the military, but then they never really reduced it. I mean, even under Bill Clinton, the U.S. pushed out the European Union in dealing with Yugoslavia, so the Americans became the main actor in Yugoslavia, not the Europeans, the Americans. And that pretty much established the system that even under Bill Clinton, it became clear that this was a world that the United States wanted to stay on top of. And Clinton gets, reelected in 1996. And then the 2000 election happens and George W. Bush wins, even though he got 500,000 less votes than Al Gore. And then, the 9/11 attacks happen in 2001. And George W. Bush says, we need to invade Afghanistan and we need to invade Iraq. And the Americans go, yes. And he gets reelected in 2004, even though they find no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, no nuclear program. He gets reelected because it's very blatant. George W. Bush administration saying, you got to reelect George W. Bush because otherwise we'll look humiliated. Osama bin Laden will win by having destroyed the Bush administration. So don't let Osama bin Laden appear to win. Support the troops is how they express it. Support the troops. Re-elect George Bush. You support the troops by re-electing George Bush because if George Bush loses, then the sacrifices of American soldiers are questioned because we'll admit that we made a mistake. So we won't want to admit. We'll just win. And that's the situation we're in today. And it's very difficult because even though the Americans might not be happy about all of the money and all of the consequences of globalization, of all these increasing diversity and immigration in the United States and exporting jobs and manufacturing, at the same time, they don't like losing, whether it be in Kabul or Taiwan or Korea, they don't like losing. So, and if you're a president, you're a politician, you're always thinking about the next election. So I guess what I'm saying is this question requires your interpretation of what is, what are the motivations, the changing dynamic, collective motivations driving American sentiment and public opinion, but sentiment more broadly towards its leaders within a dynamic globalizing world. And so we're running out of time. You have any questions?
No, very informative.
Thank you.
I'll take away from what you told me.
Okay. So I didn't make any changes here. So I guess that'll be it then. Okay.
I already saw the comments.
Okay. All right. I got another meeting. Talk to you later. See you next week.
Thank you.